Anything else in the short term, get on GFOA's website and take a look at it. What they're suggesting is that you develop a 12-month rolling period, so not a fiscal year basis. So as every month goes by, a month drops off and a new month rolls on, with at least 1 year of historical data. I think it'd be better if you could get 2 or 3, but if you're going to undertake this, it might take you a year or 2 to get to that level. Not a big deal. And it doesn't have to be extremely granular. You're going to identify your major sources of revenue and major sources of expenditures and track that activity monthly. And, the modeling that they did, I think it was on the, perhaps the more sophisticated model, graphed it out and everything relative to where you were falling behind, in the end, or where you might be ahead. But again, in the end, what it would allow you to do is project out for and it would be a short term, it's only 12 months, but allow you to project out to see if you were going to be running into problems. Now, again, this was built out, I believe, in response to the COVID pandemic, and again, what was going to happen relative to property tax collections and things of that nature in the local community. But it, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the folks that were teaching this seminar that I sat through, it proved to be a heck of a lot more valuable than just for that. But it is going to provide you something where you have some foresight into some problems if they are arising, and give you some time to consider mitigating factors, that you can implement well in advance of any crisis, be they alternative short-term financing options or budget modifications, whatever the case may be. But if followed correctly, it's going to give you a little lead time before the crisis or a crisis really paralyzes a community relative perhaps to cash flow or things of that nature. So that was all I was going to cover today. Again, I hope it wasn't too chopped up. It's kind of weird looking at a computer screen and seeing the only thing you see is yourself and a small panel. So it can be distracting, but hopefully what I had to say resonated at least something to all of you in one way or another. So thank you very much for your time.
So I'm hoping everyone can hear me, and I'm just about to start. There we are, my video. Ron, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insight and thoughts on the whole budgeting process. And just by way of introduction, again, my name is Jeff Ziplow. I work with Ron, but I am not a financial auditor. I am in Bloom Shapiro's advisory practice, and I oversee, I'll call it services provided to municipalities from a operational technology and cybersecurity perspective. And so, although I'm going in a different direction than Ron, we certainly, both Ron and I would certainly agree that COVID and the pandemic has impacted the way we need to think, and we need to think differently for the future. And I think Ron did a very good job of, talking about the long-term budget forecasting and cash flow modeling components of thinking differently. And now we need to think a little bit differently from a technology perspective. I firmly believe that, telecommuting is going to be with us for a long time. It's going to impact both businesses. I also believe it'll impact, well, certainly impacting schools. And I also believe it'll impact municipalities as well. And I think we just, again, need to think a little bit differently as to what the future is going to hold for us, how we can secure our borders. And truthfully, our borders have changed, and I'll get into that in a minute. What I'd like to do on the next slide is just share with you some facts about cybersecurity, right? So we've all heard of ransomware, and I will be going into a little bit more in depth on ransomware, because ransomware is probably one of the leading cybersecurity issues and concerns that we need to face, and it's both public and private. It is the wild, wild west out there, and we need to do whatever we can to protect ourselves. And I'm going to go into some stories in a little bit on ransomware. But I thought it would be interesting. You know, we are being hacked every 39 seconds. There is an attack. The most prevalent is phishing, and I'm sure everyone on the webinar recognizes that phishing is one of those situations that we're probably getting bombarded left and right. And part of it is COVID. COVID has impacted that. There's been, and you can see on this slide, a 424% increase in cyber breaches from last year. And I would say that is a direct result of COVID. And the next slide down, FBI reported a 300% increase in cyber crimes. Again, very much related to the pandemic and what we're all trying to deal with, and what we're facing. On the next slide, what you will also see is that 95% of the security breaches are really due to human error. People that are inadvertently giving out their credentials, and because they're thinking that they're talking to a person in the firm, or a person in the municipality, or a person in the school district, or most importantly, someone that they trust. People are under a lot of stress with COVID, and we, as just a society, want to trust people more and more. And the attackers out there recognize that, and they're doing their darndest to make us feel comfortable with a phishing email, with a phone call, with something that will allow them to get their hands on our credentials. And we need to do whatever we can to mitigate that. Certainly, we're seeing that most organizations do not have a cybersecurity incident response plan. So I'm going to ask you a question, and we can certainly get into responses at the very end. But if I were to ask you, if you suspected that you had ransomware within the municipality, what are the first 5 things that you should do? As a matter of fact, I'll go one step further. What are the first 2 things that you should do? And without having this cybersecurity incident response plan, those things are not well defined. Those things are not fully understood or socialized throughout the user community. And many times it's causing issues, particularly as it relates to ransomware. So just to share with everyone, and while I'm have everyone talking and thinking about what are the first 2 things that you would do, the first thing is to contact your IT department. And the second is to unplug your computer, unplug your servers from the network, because that's how the ransomware propagates. That's how the everything gets encrypted. And we can get into more details on that in a little bit. One of the other things that we're seeing is, and people don't realize this, but it takes over 180 days, 6 months to detect a data breach in many instances. And so we're seeing that the attackers are going into our networks, and they're starting to, they're looking around. They're trying to understand what confidential or personal information you have that they can sell and make some money on, profit on. And so they're in there for a while, and that's a big change with ransomware, which I'm going to get into in a second. The last thing I just want to share with you is IoT. IoT stands for Internet of Things. And those are various devices that we have. For example, a Ring camera, for example, Google Home, for example, Alexa. And for example, many of us have, some of us probably have a new oven that you can turn on remotely, or a garage door that we can turn on remotely, or any app that will do something for you remotely, even, turning on a car. All of those are considered IoT devices, Internet of Things devices. And we're going to be reaching 31 billion this year in IoT devices. And the news on that is, as much as we like to think that security has been built into those devices, the reality of the situation is they have not. And we've probably heard some stories about Ring cameras and the like. We just need to really understand the impact of these IoT devices. And I guess from a municipality perspective, we need to be aware and understand, do we have any IoT devices in our office? And I know some of you are thinking, well, that wouldn't or couldn't happen. In doing our cyber assessments, you can buy, and today I believe is an Amazon's day to buy things at low cost. You can buy an Echo for under $40, and you can put it in place within an office, hook it up to your network. And now we've created something that could invoke a data security breach. And so I just wanted to bring that out for everyone to think about and understand. So moving on, let's talk about ransomware. Ransomware has changed, and it has changed significantly over the past couple of years. So if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, the way ransomware works is someone inadvertently downloads a piece of software, a piece of malware. They inadvertently clicked on something, whatever the case may be, but they click on something, and then off behind the scenes, nope, keep going. Sorry, stay where you are. And I know I use my hands, so I know they probably saw me moving my hands forward. No, apologize for that. So with the ransomware, what happened 2 years ago is that we would be in a situation where this payload would be downloaded, and then it would run, and then what would end up happening is that it would start encrypting data, not only on our PC, but it would go out to any of the network shares that we had access to and start encrypting that. And then typically we would get something on the screen that said, hey, we're holding your data ransom, and pay us a ransom. And you had really two choices, and typically they would say pay within 3 days. So you either paid or didn't pay the ransom. If you didn't pay the ransom, that would certainly mean, again, 2 years ago, that you had a good backup, so you could do a full and complete restore on all your data and be up and operational relatively quickly. Some people a couple of years ago would pay the ransom because they weren't sure that their backup or restore process would work very well. And so, that's what it was like 2 years ago. Fast forward to today. Same type of thing where someone inadvertently downloads a piece of information and a payload gets loaded onto a computer. But now the attackers have gotten smarter, more sophisticated, and they are now going through your network before turning on that encryption key. They're spending some time on your network. They're looking at your network, looking for key information about personnel, any type of confidential information, social security information, anything that they can get their arms around. And here's the unique thing now. They're looking for it, they find it, they're going to extract it, and then they're going to exfiltrate it out to themselves. So they're going to take this information and send it to themselves. And we've seen this in a number of ways. They're extracting databases and they're sending it to themselves. They're capturing data backups and sending it to themselves. And so once they have that information, now they go through the encryption process, right? And so now you're being held ransom. And so here's the second change that has happened. So now things are encrypted, and you'll see here there's this double extortion comment. Well, the reason that it's double extortion is they've encrypted the information. They're going to not give you the encryption key until you pay the ransom. And oh, by the way, if you don't pay the ransom, they're telling you that they're going to take the information that they extracted from your network, and they're going to put it on the deep dark web. So in fact, what they're trying to do is enforce to the best of their ability that you pay the ransom. Another change is that people are negotiating with attackers. In the past, you'd get, you owe us $10,000. Well, now the dollars have gone up significantly. So now it's 50 to 100 to more, $100,000 or more, particularly if you don't want, your information to go on the deep dark web. And what's happening is, in some instances, people are negotiating with attackers. To be quite frank, if you're ever in this situation, I would certainly and highly recommend that you reach out to legal counsel, because there's a lot of legal ramifications and issues. Particularly some recent ones have been identified. If you're paying monies to, even in Bitcoin, if you're paying monies to someone overseas in Asia or Russia or wherever, there's some federal issues that need to be addressed, and it may be illegal to pay that ransom. So the landscape of ransomware has changed significantly, and I just wanted to share with you that we just need to be aware of it. If you go to the next slide, you'll see I had mentioned the concept of the deep dark web, and most people aren't really too familiar with the deep dark web. Just to share with everyone here, there's really 3 layers. We're all pretty much accustomed to the surface web, and when we go to Yahoo and Google and Facebook and Netflix, any of these are sitting on the very top layer. However, there's the deep and dark web, and those are the 2 levels below the surface, and that's where people go, and they're hidden from the rest of the world. There's actually a very specific web browser that one needs to use. It's called Tor, or the Onion router, and that would allow for total anonymity while you're taking advantage and paying for some of the data that's on the deep dark web. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, but I just did want to give you an overview of what that is. We talked a little bit about Internet of Things, but I also wanted to share with you that we need to, as I mentioned earlier, we need to start thinking differently, and we need to think about, well, our municipality might be well protected, but what about the vendors that have access to our systems? Are they protected? Are they protecting us in an equal or better way than the security protocols that we have? And 2 examples of this are HVA systems and voice over IP or phone systems that many times are connected up to our network. Many times vendors have remote access to the HVA system, the heating and cooling system, or to the phone system. And that is a potential exposure that someone else could take advantage of. There have been a number of instances where, and one which was in a very open and public situation, is the Home Depot breach. Home Depot breach actually started with the HVAC vendor. And that vendor was compromised. That vendor had access, direct access to Home Depot's network, and that's how they were able to get in and siphon off credit card information. So again, we just need to be, we need to understand who has access to our network. Even if we have software vendors that are supporting specific applications on our network, we need to make sure that there are security protocols in place to mitigate those risks. On the next slide, I didn't want to lose sight of the fact that our smartphones are being attacked. And this is something that has gotten more and more prevalent. We're starting to see and find that we're getting text messages or emails that have links with them. And even sometimes I get a text message and you may think it's from someone you know. Be very careful, because I can spoof a text message and create a link that your cell phone would go out to and download a payload, download some software that would cause some potential issues on your smartphone. All smartphones should be encrypted. I can tell you that if you have a password on your iPhone, by default, that means it's encrypted. Some of the other phones, just make sure that they are encrypted on a regular basis. So I'm going to move on to the next topic. Our next topic is this new world that we're living in, having to work in a virtual world, and what we need to start thinking about and doing differently. And it's been very interesting to see how different municipalities have adopted to COVID over time. And I would say some have done a very good job. Some had policies and protocols in place that impacted them from really moving forward in an electronic way. So moving on to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about what am I talking about? So the purchase order process. I would say most, I can't say all, but most systems do have the ability to do electronic purchase orders. Most systems have the ability to decentralize the purchase order process. Most systems do have the ability to provide and allow for electronic workflow and sign-offs of purchase orders. So that's the good news. The bad news, quite frankly, and from what I've seen, not all municipalities have implemented, those types of features. Most recently, I was at a municipality, and departments put together handwritten purchase orders. The departments put together a package of any type of attachments, hard copies. The departments will move that hard copy package to the department head for their sign off. And then that package, hard copy package, goes to the central office and gets reviews and approvals. At which point in time, after everyone has signed off on the hard copies, the purchase order typically will get entered into the purchase order system. I think we need to think about things differently. We need to start invoking and utilizing these technology solutions in a much better way. We need to provide training to the user communities. We need to create new policies and procedures and socialize it with the various departments who process purchase orders, so that we don't have to be in the office to process a purchase order. We don't have to be handling paper to process a purchase order. So those are the types of things that, again, we just need to think about differently and put into practice and put into place. Check processing, and when I look at check processing, I look at it both from an AP, accounts payable perspective, writing checks to vendors, as well as payroll, and how we pay our employees. And, again, some municipalities had been dealing with this issue very well in the past, meaning that everything was electronic. They would process everything through the accounts payable or financial management system. They would get appropriate sign off and approval through the system electronically, and then they would generate the check run. There would be an electronic sign off on that, and then we would pay our vendors electronically. I was at a municipality again, probably a month ago, and they shared with me that they are still paying their vendors through hard copy checks. And, they had to have people come into the office, process, through the financial system, process the checks, and then physically have people sign off on the checks, physical signatures. And then one step further, they actually had to, package them up and put them into envelopes. Although the process is very easy, I think because of this new world that we're in, we should be thinking differently, and we have the ability and tools to do things differently. The same thing is true with payroll checks. I think we need to, certainly promote and push people to get and use online, ACH-based payroll checks. That way, no one really has to be in the office to get a check. We do need to think about how we're going to handle segregation of duties and responsibilities. I'm a big security and controls person, so I don't want to say that we're going to ignore it. But again, most systems give us the ability for some good checks and balances and workflow capabilities. And so we can handle it certainly that way. Moving on to the next slide. This one, to some extent, has amazed me. Request for a proposal. I would say within the past 2 weeks, again, so this is in the middle of COVID, people have had months to deal with this very issue. Requests for proposal are still being processed via hard copy, which means that someone has to go to their office, print things out, and then in some instances actually hand deliver them, because there have been some issues with FedEx delivering to offices that are closed. And I think this is a fairly easy process that we can change. We can do everything electronically. There are ways to produce and validate electronic signatures and get electronic notaries in place and create a more electronic-based request for proposal process. I would imagine many of you have been engaged with or have needed to participate in some type of committee meetings. I think for the most part, people have certainly gotten used to either a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting where we have committee members and we're meeting remotely. I think we're going to need to continue in that vein for a long time to come. And so I also think that we should really establish what those new protocols are and put them in place and in practice and figure out how to better utilize the tools. I've been in some Zoom meetings that there was a Zoom bomb situation where we had a bunch of people that were causing issues, a lot of noise on the Zoom meeting. And there are ways to protect a committee meeting from that type of situation. And so having those protocols in place, I think are very important. Moving on to the next slide, we also have some external operations that we need to be thinking about. Certainly the tax assessor and collector, we need to be, and I would say many organizations already have the ability to look up assessment information and tax information. Many municipalities, are allowing residents to pay taxes remotely. I know that for the most part, most municipalities do need to charge, and I certainly recognize that, whatever the credit card fees are, and pass those on accordingly. I just think that we need to make sure that they're working effectively, and that we promote, payments through these electronic tools, again, to minimize and mitigate the risk from people coming into into town hall or city hall. This also gives people the ability to do things 24/7 by 365. And so just making sure that people have that capability is important. Another area, park and recs, being able to sign up for programs remotely. I think, again, some people can and have the ability to do that now. If you don't, I would certainly suggest that it's something that you may want to consider. On the next slide, I provided a couple more areas where external operations need to be considered. The whole permitting process. What can I do online? Are all the forms online? Can I fill out the forms online? Can I fill out the forms online and then send them into the land use department, planning and zoning and the like, building? And can I also attach documents? So again, I think there are ways to use some of the systems that are already in place, but do it in a more virtual environment, and really think outside the box in how we can use these tools to make it as effective, to increase visibility into the whole permitting process, and make things safe for our residents. The last area that I'll talk about from an external operations is the town clerk. This is one of those areas that I think is probably one of the most challenged areas. The town clerk offices that I have worked with, they like paper, and they want paper. And I think we need to figure out guidance and guidelines to provide and see what we can do to minimize the amount of paper. From an electronic signature perspective, from an electronic notary perspective, there are ways to do that in a very secure way. There are some systems out there from a clerk perspective that will handle that, but not all do, and I certainly recognize that. But that's that one area that I think we need to look at and see how we can work with town clerks to effectively implement change and reduce and minimize the amount of hard copy paper that needs to be processed. So let's move on to the next topic, and then we'll get into some questions. The next topic is the teleworker. And as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that we are in a new paradigm where there's a new paradigm shift, and our teleworkers, we need to create an environment for the teleworkers. We've heard a little bit more about the second wave of COVID. I'm hoping not, but and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but who knows? And once we get beyond COVID, hopefully there is never another pandemic, but we can't be so sure. So I think there's a number of areas that we need to think about as relates to the teleworker. And so on the next slide, let's just consider some things from a life-work separation. When COVID first struck, a lot of the municipalities that I work with, and we need to go to the next slide if you don't mind. And the slide after that, thank you. So when COVID first hit and we literally had to shut down municipal operations and offices, I would say that from the municipalities that I work with, I would say that 40% of them were in relatively good shape, that they could either bring home their laptop computers, or they were able to get laptop computers from the municipality or within the municipality. I would tell you that 60, maybe even 75% were not in a good shape when COVID first hit. And what was happening is that we were forced into a situation where people needed to work from home, but we didn't have the capabilities of working home in a robust way. So, here's some things to think about. Um, I will tell you, using your home computer is not a good idea. And there's many reasons for that. There's some open holes as it relates to um, securing or using your home PC. So if you think about it, in the past, um, the what we had to secure was the municipality and any of the buildings within the municipality, and that was relatively straightforward. We could control how we secured, town hall, city hall, or any of the remote buildings. And I would say in general, IT did a relatively good job of that. Unfortunately, the landscape changed significantly and the threat surface changed significantly. And what I mean by that is not only did we have to, or not only did we have to protect the city hall and the remote buildings, but now the threat surface has opened up to our individual homes and the tools that we're using, the devices that we're using at home. And IT, in many instances, weren't in a position to protect the employee's home, the employee's devices, if they weren't using, a municipality-based computer. And so my point here is we have to figure out, how we can ensure that workers have access to devices, desktop devices, laptops, not desktop, laptop devices that come from and are secured by the municipality. And that way we can make sure that the patches are up to date. That way we can make sure that the virus software is up to date, and we can ensure and do a much better job of securing it rather than having a user use their home PC, which may not have appropriate virus protection software on it, which may already be infected, and which may not be fully patched. So I think we need to be thinking about that. In addition, if we are using a home computer, or I should say an office computer, we shouldn't let other people be using that computer. It's really important that we don't store school, municipal, or student information on that computer, and any documents should be stored at the municipality, not on that computer. And that's something that we need to really push and promote with our user base, with our employees. Another issue, moving on to the next slide, is when we're at home, we're using our home network. And again, sometimes our home networks are not secure. We have situations where we go out and we buy our own wireless router, and we don't change the security settings on it. And so many of the routers have a standard, believe it or not, they have a standard user ID and password, and I can go out on the internet and find out what my device uses, or what any device uses, and then I can attempt to go in and access that. Linksys, typically had no user ID, and the password was admin, all lowercase. And we know these things up front, so an attacker can go out and try them ahead of time. In the case, if you're using your home, if you are working at home, let's make sure that you've changed your user ID and password on your routers and any type of wireless devices, that you've enabled you've enabled firewalls, and that you have enabled Wi-Fi security passwords using, there's a couple different standards out there, WPA or WPA2. To me, it doesn't matter. Just implementing something is really important, and limit who can connect up to your Wi-Fi. that's really important as well. So moving on to the next slide, what we've seen is, and hopefully it's in your community as well, that many municipalities were protecting the remote access from the home to the municipality through what's known as a VPN. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. And if you look at the diagram, you'll see what it really does is it creates, it's called a tunnel, and it creates a tunnel between the municipality and your PC. And what it also does is it encrypts the data within that tunnel. So no one can extract information if in fact they did get into the tunnel. And so it's really important to ensure, and certainly ask your IT department and make sure that they have in fact put into place, you know, VPNs and good security protocols for people to access the network remotely. Another thing that people need to do on the next slide is to implement something called MFA. And if you don't know what MFA is, it's your friend. It will help security significantly. So MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. And what it really is, it's something you know and something you have. So the something you know is typically your user ID and password. I know that. The something you have is, it can be on the right-hand side of the screen. You'll see there's this thing called an RSA token. So it could be the RSA token. That number changes, I believe, every 30 seconds or so. And so what MFA does is you'll put in a user ID, you'll put in your password, and then it will send out, it'll either ask you for the RSA token number, so it's something you have on you that you can look at, or it will send you a text message, it'll call your phone, or it will open up a mobile app. In the middle screen that you can see, it says approved sign in. And so it's actually calling up on your phone saying, hey, someone is attempting to get into the network. Someone is trying to get into your email. And are you approving it? And you can verify or not. Sometimes it'll say enter in these numbers, and you get different numbers each time you attempt to remotely access either email or certainly the network, and you put it in and you're fine. The attackers typically don't have that information. So that's why multi-factor authentication is really, really, really important. The other factor of multi-factor or the other thing about multi-factor authentication is, and in an area that is really important to think about, is if anyone is using Office 365, you should absolutely be using multi-factor authentication. It will change your security posture and improve it significantly, because what we have seen is nothing is wrong about Office 365. It's really a great tool. We have seen, and going back to a number of slides earlier, where people inadvertently were reached out to either through a phishing or a phone call, and their credentials were compromised. And once those credentials were compromised, I could go into Office 365 and start forwarding emails to me and deleting emails, so you never even knew that you received an email. And so multi-factor authentication will prevent that from happening. And it's a really, really good tool. If you're not using it, I strongly urge you to reach out to your IT department and say, hey, can we implement MFA, and how quickly can we make that happen? Moving on to the next slide. Password practices. I thought it was just a good, I wanted to share this with you because in fact, passwords can be cracked. There are tools out there that will read a password file and will do its best to crack it. And if you have a 6-character password, it takes 12 seconds, 7 characters, 5 minutes, 8 characters, 4 hours, and you can see what happens when you get up to 12 characters. I'll live with 12 characters, to be quite frank. There are some new standards out there. An organization by the name of NIST has made some strong recommendations that passwords should be no less than 10 to 12 characters in length. They should be complex, and they should be passphrases. And so I just gave you a passphrase that I could use. I am a New England Patriots fan, but at the end of the day, you can see that I'm using a term. It's not something that you would find in the dictionary. It's not something that you would find anywhere. So this is a password that one could use. I will tell you that I strongly recommend, 12 character passwords, if at all possible. On the next slide, another thing to think about is, we get bombarded with, these security questions, and people are saying, hey, you need to put in, your answer for these security questions, and that will help protect you. And that is potentially considered a second level of security. And one of the things I do want to point out here is that the questions that you see here can typically be found on social media. So what's your pet's name, where you went to high school, your favorite movie. Most of us that have social media accounts, you'll be able to find that information. And so I strongly, again, suggest maybe looking at this a little bit differently and putting and answering the question differently than what that question has meaning to most others, right? So I don't have a pet's name that is Blue Jumping Jacks, but I figured that that's a good response to a question to keep me safe and secure. Moving on to the next slide, our employees and our municipal employees can be the greatest line of security and our first line of security defense. They can also be our biggest liability. And the more our employees know about security, the better their position to help the organization, to help the municipality. And I really think it's important that they understand and recognize that if they think they did something, reach out to the IT department and tell them what they did. If they responded to an email that they are questioning, it's always best to, I'll use the term cry wolf. I'd rather have you cry wolf than have you be exposed to situations where, a municipality is going to be in a ransom situation. We've probably heard the story about Atlanta. Atlanta was put out of business for, I want to say it was 4 to 6 weeks because of ransomware. And there have been other municipalities, certainly other school districts, throughout the United States, throughout the Northeast actually, that have run into ransomware. And the faster we deal with it, the better off we are. I do believe in periodic security awareness training sessions to just promote and push security training to our employees. It can be done remotely. It does not need to be done in an in-office, in a conference room setting. We can do Zoom meetings, but the more we get out there, the more our employees know, the better off we are. They need to know what phishing has taken on a new, it's a business, to be quite frank. And spear phishing, which is very directed phishing attacks, general phishing attacks, and even, phone calls. So, I've seen a lot of the following scenario. Now that we're working at home, teleworking, what happens if you were to get a call from the IT department within the municipality to say, hey, we need your credentials, or you received an email from someone who you thought is part of the IT department? Would you give them your credentials? Would you respond over the phone with your credentials? I'm hoping the answer is no, but we need to make people aware that that's the right answer, that we need to affect change with our employees and make sure that they're security conscious and their behavior helps to enhance our overall security posture. Moving on to touchless payments, and I promise you, this is actually the very last slide, so I just wanted to touch on this. If you do go to the next slide, I'm hoping that we're doing our best to use touchless payments. Taking in cash, taking checks. I heard yesterday that unfortunately, COVID could still remain on a surface for up to 24 hours. So again, things continue to change and evolve. And if we can take advantage of touchless payments, paying through, a mobile wallet, paying through, a credit card, any type of in-office payments made through our phone or a credit card that we don't have to touch, I think it'll benefit everyone. It helps to promote social distancing. It helps to keep everyone safe. We don't have to expose our employees at risk for touching anything, including paper documents, paper money. And I think it certainly promotes good standards across the board. So I know that we've provided a whole host of thought-provoking and insight to not only the budgeting process but cybersecurity perspective. And so I'm going to go to the next slide, which actually gives us that opportunity to ask any type of questions and anything that you would like answered from either Ron or myself.
Folks, I will turn on this Q&A here and see if anyone has any questions for us. You can also type it into the chat if you're finding that the Q&A isn't working for some reason. In the chat here. I don't see any questions.
I don't either. So,
I do see one here. Yep. Do you have any experience with ATM-like terminals for tax payments?
I know that you can reach out to typically your tax collection software vendor, and they can provide what type of solutions work for their system. I do know that there are a number of tax collector systems that will allow you to use touchless and use credit cards and the like. I don't think there's a one size fits all in that case. So there's another question out here. Do you know any city that is paying all their AP vendors by ACH? The answer is I do not. And I can say that with a very clean heart. I wish there was a different answer to that, but that doesn't mean that we can't work towards it. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be going and moving towards the 95% get paid through ACH, and to actually promote it with our AP vendors. I mean, when you think about it, they get the money much faster than getting a check. And so I think part of it's twofold. One, we need to promote it. We need to talk about the protocols that we as a municipality follow, and this is what our recommended practice is. And in the event that we run into a situation where we can't go into the office and pay by a physical check, please understand. But we will do it by ACH, and I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Any other questions? The one thing that I will share with you, I don't know how many folks on the line are using a Tyler solution. So Tyler Technologies has a number of different solutions: Munis, ADS, Infinite Visions. They also have a tax and collection system and utility billing and so on and so forth. And I am certainly not promoting them. I did want to share with folks that they recently identified a potential breach with their internal systems. They did not say that they had any breach with any of their other major systems. They had an unknown third party or unauthorized intruder within their systems. And they reached out to folks and let people know that it happened. And I would imagine most of you are getting ongoing emails from them, but if not, I certainly did want to share that with you. And if there are any questions, certainly reach out to the folks at Tyler. They did not describe the hack as a ransomware attack, but to be quite frank, they didn't describe it as anything else. So I think the jury's still out on that and exactly what that is.
Jeff, there's also a question in the chat area. Do you have any suggestions on how to urge taxpayers to use online payments?
You know, I think it's one of those things that we need to figure out ways to promote it. I know that if you know, there's a difference in using, you know, a bank account and, or, you know, your bank account information versus a credit card. There are some concerns with people about using or giving out a bank account number. I don't believe typically there's a very low fee, if any fee associated with that. Certainly with credit card numbers or using a credit card, there is typically a 2.5–3% fee associated with it. And, you know, people don't like to pay additional fees if they don't have to. I think we just need to start promoting things differently and promoting good cyber hygiene and making this available and attractive to people. I think what we're going to find is the younger residents in our respective communities will be taking advantage of it more and more, because it does allow us to have a 7x24x365 capability. There's another question out here. How do you encourage people to let go of paper-based processes? You have to do it with them. You can't do it to them. And what I mean by that is creating an internal mandate that says we're not going to be taking paper anymore is just going to cause havoc, in my opinion, is going to cause a lot of stress, is just not going to be effective. What I have seen is when we sit down with people, when we talk to people, when we actually document the paper handling and people can see the efficiencies gained by a more electronic world, I think they'll buy into it. And maybe you have to do it in phases and in chunks so that they can believe in it. But I can tell you that you need to do it with them, not to them. We are compiling, another question, we are compiling numerous shared service options and cost savings measure and would like to further research some of the options you presented. If anyone has any questions about the presentation, you know, certainly please feel free to reach out to myself or Ron. We can certainly, you know, enjoy a conversation and see if, you know, there's if we can provide some insight and guidance as to any type of initiatives that you're looking at. Certainly shared services is an area, to be quite frank, that is near and dear to my heart. I do believe very much in shared services, in being able to bring together operations between the school district and the municipality, and bringing people together so that we can figure out ways to be more efficient, to have immediate backups to operations, to our operations, and make things, you know, as efficient as possible. So if anyone is interested in those types of discussions, we can certainly have it at a later time. Any other questions? Well, I think we're at a good stopping point. Ron, any questions or comments from you?
Nope, I'm good, Jeff. That was very, very informative. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer.
I just wanted to thank you both on behalf of the League of Cities and Towns. This was very informative, and I'm quite sure you'll be getting some calls for follow-up and further information, and maybe even another presentation on shared services would be something for the future. So as I had mentioned earlier when we started, I will get this presentation out to the attendees. And of course, it will have contact information for both Jeff and Ron. So I do thank you both very much for your time, and I thank the attendees as well. So I hope you all have a nice day in the rain. Thanks, folks.